Last of Us 2 is coming out soon. Let's watch How to Survive It. Shout out to the Film Theorists. Let's get straight to it.
If you were in a zombie apocalypse like The Last of Us, what would you do? I mean, you'd probably die. That's what I would do. But what could you do if you wanted to survive? Well, today I'm going to give you some advice and show you the best chance to become The Last of Us. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that's working on its golf serve. Speaking of, it's about time we talk about The Last of Us again. Yeah, and yet another case of the weird cross-media landscape allowing Film Theory to talk about a video game franchise. The award-winning series of Last of Us games has been adapted into the award-winning series of television, and it's finally back for season 2.
Yeah, you might hear some stuff in the background.
If you don't know, The Last of Us takes place in a world devastated by a zombie apocalypse. But these zombies aren't your typical George Romero fare. These weren't created by a virus or by magic, but instead a real-world fungus known as the cordyceps. Basically, these mushrooms are able to infect and hijack the nervous systems of insects like ants. But in The Last of Us, it's evolved to control human hosts as well, spreading across the world and ending civilization as we know it. Now, unlike a lot of traditional zombies, these Last of Us zombies come with a lot of advantages and disadvantages, especially in the show. They've evolved a sort of echolocation, thus why they're called clickers, but they don't spread using spores in the show like they do in the game. They're also all connected by the mushroom's mycelial network. That's basically like mushroom roots, which means that if one zombie knows where you are, there's a good chance that more do too. But because they're basically made of mushrooms, that means that they would have some specific drawbacks that a normal zombie wouldn't. So I want to ask the question. Joel and Ellie are trying to get across the country in season 1 of The Last of Us, but at the beginning of season 2, they're just chilling in a settlement, surviving. If we wanted to make a real settlement to survive in the world of The Last of Us, what exactly would we need? Where would we want to go? And what can we do to both ensure our own survival and fight back against the cordyceps creepy crawlies that threaten us every day? Well, loyal theorists, prepare your survival packs. Let's swing into it. Now, just to start out with and get this out of the way, I think a lot of the basics for zombie survival also apply here in The Last of Us. There's a classic novel called The Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks that really hits the nail on the head.
It's different from Walking Dead.
Loved that book. And the broad points? Close combat is always going to be discouraged if you can avoid it because it gives them more of a chance to bite you, and headshots are your best chance at putting a zombie down. Traditional armor is also not recommended since it's going to be loud and slow you down. You can actually go check out our sister location Style Theory next weekend for a more in-depth look at the best outfit to survive The Last of Us. Anyway, traveling by day is also always going to be your best bet since you're going to be able to see the zombies coming more easily, and if you can find a fortified location left over from our civilization, something like an army base or an oil rig, you've hit the jackpot.
Oil rig is crazy.
All of that also applies here, but of course, like we've already said, the zombies in The Last of Us aren't normal zombies. And as we build up our strategy guide for surviving against these fungal foes, we're gonna need to know the basics of how they actually function, right? As we've talked about at the top of this episode and at length in previous theories, the zombie outbreak in The Last of Us was caused by a mutated strain of the cordyceps fungus, which is important. See, a lot of people confuse fungi for plants, but these are actually two completely different
biological kingdoms. My dad has medicine downstairs for cordyceps.
They have about as much in common with plants as we animals do, i.e., not a lot. While plants make energy through photosynthesis and sunlight, fungi are actually more like animals in that they need to consume other organic matter to live. That's why you see mushrooms growing out of trees, or food you forgot in the back of the fridge, or on the face of a clicker zombie. Now, for most animals, we eat our food and then break it down with acid in our stomachs, which we can then turn into energy for our bodies to use. But fungi operate in almost the complete opposite way. Instead, they sort of spit out their digestive juices onto their food first, breaking it down so they can absorb it. They basically like spit acid onto whatever they're growing on and then slurp it all up once it's melted down. But here's the thing. That digestion process requires a lot of water. Like a lot of water. Fungi are roughly 90% water compared to the 50 to 70% of a human that's water, and they thrive the best in moist environments. You may have heard or seen that fungi love cool, dark locations, but those factors are more or less important only because they let the fungus stay moist. Without heat or direct sunlight, there's less evaporation drying the fungus out. So if we want to maximize our chances of survival, we're gonna need to move to a climate that makes the cordyceps feel like dehydrated SpongeBob. And best of all, we also know that this applies to the mutated cordyceps in the show.
It's bone dry.
Yeah, in the second episode here, Joel checks a patch of fungus, but because it's too dry, it's safe, it's dead, and won't be pinging other mushrooms in the network their location. Because, I mean, man, their communication can just be so easy. Which reminds me...
You know, in a post-apocalypse full of mushroom zombies, I really wish it was easier to stay connected to people, you know? But
Wait. Huh?
Imagine
Joel?
though.
Joel, how are you calling me without a physical SIM card? Oh, you're using the sponsor for today's theory.
Okay.
Saley. Let's talk.
Yeah, shout out Saley, but whatever. I don't even know what that is.
Necessarily the case in the world of The Last of Us. Remember, in the show's prologue, there's a short scene explaining how the cordyceps were able to infect humans. Normally, our body temperature would be too high for them to survive, but if the cordyceps were able to adapt to a hotter temperature due to, say, global warming, then human-infecting cordyceps might be a concern. Not only is this creepy and ominous if you just look out the window, but it also implies that the cordyceps can withstand temperatures of at least 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 36.6 degrees Celsius, and those temperatures are getting dangerously close to the temps that could cause a human to have a heat stroke. So if we can't safely out-heat resist the cordyceps, instead the next best thing is going to be finding a location where the temperature and climate can maximize human survivability while minimizing mushroom survivability. Basically what we're looking for here is known as the thermal neutral zone, or TNZ for a human. This is the temperature range where an organism doesn't need to burn energy in order to regulate its temperature, which itself is a fancy way of saying that we need to find a climate where our bodies don't have to sweat a ton because sweating wastes energy. Scientists believe that the TNZ for humans is between 66 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit, assuming that there's some moderate wind and humidity. Which, speaking of, though temperature is important, humidity is actually going to be our biggest concern here when finding the perfect place to hunker down. Humidity is a measurement of how much water vapor is in the air, and as we've established, mushrooms love moisture. I've lived in the American South most of my life, where it's incredibly humid, and a big concern here can be moisture getting trapped in your walls and letting fungus grow inside of the buildings. Actually happened down the hall for me earlier this year. That was not fun. But as it so happens, when it comes to conserving energy, our bodies also hate moist climates because that humidity in the air can prevent our sweat from evaporating. This can result in what's called non-productive sweating, where you sweat, but it doesn't evaporate, meaning that it doesn't cool us off. It just makes us sticky. Gross! Go check out our video about the science of the Dune still suit if you want an explanation for why sweating is just so important in these sorts of environments. So with all of that in mind, both for our own sake and to give these cordyceps clickers the worst chance possible, we're gonna want a dry climate that's ideally on the cooler side of that ideal temperature. And thankfully, we have tools that can help us find the ideal location. Meet the Köppen-Geiger map, a tool that breaks down different types of climates in the United States. What we're looking for here is what the Köppen-Geiger map classifies as a BSK climate. That's areas with a cold, semi-arid climate, also known as a steppe. That's steppe with an E. For our international theorists, there are plenty of steppes worth stepping onto in each continent, especially for our Eurasian theorists. You guys actually have the largest patch of semi-arid land in the world, the Great Steppe.
That reminds me, I don't know if they're going to do anything like international or foreign. I don't know how they would do it, because in Walking Dead, obviously you got Daryl going to Paris, and Carol flying to Paris. But it's like, how are they going to do it? I don't think they're going to do that in The Last of Us. Because how would they? Unless, like, Ellie gets on a boat in The Last of Us 3, part of the game. She gets on a boat and goes to, like, Europe or something. Which, hey, that could be kind of crazy. I'm not going to lie. Because if we're going based off this with, like, the specific terrain, that could be kind of interesting. There's probably already a big-ass settlement there, bro. I mean, isn't it technically... There's a 20-year jump from the beginning of the show to, like, now. So...
which spans from Hungary all the way to Manchuria. But for Americans like myself, Joel, and Ellie, that covers a big strip of the Midwestern mountainous United States.
That's where they
places like Montana and Colorado, all the way down to New Mexico and parts of western Texas. Funnily enough, a lot of season 1 of the show actually took place in those areas, and they received a lot of complaints on being light on the zombies in those sections. But scientifically, it tracks. The infected are going to have a harder time thriving in these areas, as opposed to somewhere wicked humid like Boston. So if they were just looking for the best chance to survive and not get out to the West Coast for a specific purpose, Joel and Ellie should have hunkered down here. And ironically enough, Tommy's settlement in Jackson County, Wyoming also happens to be the most humid part of that state. So, if they want out of zombie country, they may want to scoot out a bit east. Okay, so we know the basics of surviving zombies, and we've settled in the steppes, likely in the Midwestern United States. The next big thing we're going to need for our survival is a reliable source of water. I mean, after all, we're specifically looking for somewhere arid arid and dry, we're going to need water, but this itself provides yet another small challenge for us. See, we're not going to want to settle next to a still body of water, like a lake, for a couple of reasons. Yes, that would risk moisture exposure, which we've talked about already, but another big factor here, how that water is going to carry sound. See, the Last of Us zombies are unique amongst their undead brethren because they focus on sound for hunting. But I mean, they're called clickers because they use echolocation like a bat to find their prey, and they're instantly attracted to sound. This is why Joel is so adamant about being so quiet when he knows there are clickers nearby.
From this point forward, we are silent, not quiet. Silent.
We've actually talked about similar horror monsters in a previous strategy guide for surviving a quiet place, where we warned you guys against hanging out near bodies of water because they reflect and amplify sound. So just like with the quiet place monsters, that means that any noise you make next to a lake could unintentionally act like a beacon for the clickers. Thankfully, there are solutions here. One, you could build next to a flowing river to hide your noise, but that would also risk moisture sort of jumping into the structures you build, which, as we've already said, is not good. Or two, you could build a little bit away from a lake so you can go get your water without the fear of constantly needing to be silent. But this would really risk and expose yourself while you're out in the wilderness carrying that water. Or three, you could dig yourself a well. Yeah, because so much of the Midwestern United States is so dry, one reliable source of water that people have used for centuries is the groundwater. In fact, a solid 7% of residents of Colorado get their drinking water from wells. That doesn't sound like a lot, but remember that a majority of people live in cities where wells aren't going to be used as often, if at all. So if you're in a rural area, like you're trying to survive away from zombie hordes in major cities, wells are absolutely something you should work on. So all of this, great stuff. Knowing where we have the best chances of surviving is awesome. But what if we want to do something a bit more than survive? What if we wanted to thrive, to rebuild society? Well, we're gonna need something else. Or rather, someone else. We're going to need a community to protect us and restart everything. And not only that, but, well, it'll get awfully lonely if you're just out there alone. Even Bill, the ultimate survivalist who successfully prepared for a lifetime alone in the apocalypse, lived a shallow, hollow life before he found Frank. In the short term, making allies and partnerships improves your chances of survival. In a world where you could turn into mushroom food at any moment, having a buddy to watch your six can literally save your life. And in the long term, if we zoom way out, saving our species is the true mark of survival, and the only way we're gonna do that is if we build up some sort of society. According to biologists, there's a shorthand principle called...
That's another thing too. Is there any possible way that, like, if all differences and all egos and, you know, people having problems, all that aside, if we all really just come together and work together as a species, can we honestly go wipe out every single, like, you know, zombie pretty much? Like, work together to take everything out. Even take out all the cordyceps, all that, and, like, you know, I mean, you can't really control, like, the weather part, but, like, honestly, contain that, you know? Build a big-ass wall surrounding a state if you really wanted to. But, you know, that's not going to happen. They would have already done it. But, yep.
Called the 50-500 rule. This estimates that a minimum viable population for a species to survive is 50 individuals. That many will mean that they can avoid the pitfalls of inbreeding once it's time to make more individuals, if you catch my drift. But you need 500 individuals if you're going to prevent what's known as genetic drift. That's random changes in the genes that can cause genetic traits to be lost or become way too widespread. Now, to be clear, it's going to take a lot of time to build up that much trust with that many people.
But it
is possible, and when you do, well, there's still more you need to consider. Even if we have the numbers here, we also need to think about what social roles and jobs we're going to need to rebuild our society. We need to think about who we're going to attract to this new settlement. If we have a lot of different types of skills in this new society we build, that means that we're going to be more likely to be self-sufficient and have skills, tools, and goods that we can barter with other groups of survivors. So for your individual consideration here, if you can provide a unique service, you're going to be super valuable in your society. And if worse comes to worse, bandits might consider you too valuable to kill and let you live. But of course, that's a worst case scenario. Right off the bat, obviously we're gonna want some food providers and builders. We're talking people who have skills with hunting, gathering, farming, gardening, and animal breeders. Even a skilled cook or chef is going to be considered valuable here. Likewise, if you're a carpenter, or a mechanic, an engineer, welder, or blacksmith, your skills will be invaluable. I mean, I don't know how to build a house.
Teach me how to build, I got
it. Another obvious role we're gonna want to fill here are healers. engineers,
A lot of
doctors,
people
medics, and
who know how
nurses
to
who can
kill.
keep us patched up while we're injured and cure us when we're sick. Plus, someone's gonna be needed to deliver any inevitable babies. And of course, though it won't be important
always just
for
find a random
immediate
doctor.
survival, people who preserve culture are also going to be incredibly important. We're talking teachers, historians, priests, and even artists. There's a reason that those jobs exist in basically every culture around the world. Humanity has only thrived because we've been able to pass on knowledge from generation to generation, and a unified culture through art and religion is going to be vital if we want our settlement to survive.
Yeah, that's
beyond
very underrated.
us. But perhaps the most important
like,
job that we need to
mental
highlight here, the scientist.
aspect.
Yeah, really. And in fact, being a scientist might be your secret weapon for creating a new civilization
you
for
just be a
survival.
scientist.
Now,
Like,
the
you
benefits
can't
of
do
a
that.
scientist overlap a lot with stuff like medics or engineers. They can use their big old brains to improve everyone's quality of life. But the real importance here is going to be the scientist's ability to fight back
Exactly.
against the cordyceps, but maybe not in the way you expect. The Last of Us is a story about Ellie and her immunity, and the hope that she's going to be able to be the source of a vaccine
Fireflies
against the
tried it.
cordyceps infection. But that wouldn't be the case. We've covered this in previous theories, but a vaccine isn't going to be helpful against a fungal infection at all, and Ellie's immunity is more than likely the result of multiple complex factors that would be nigh impossible to recreate. Now, I'm not saying throw all of the scientists who specialize in that sort of medicine out to the mushroom zombie wolves, but there is another type of
She was
scientist that would
born,
be
like,
way more
halfway.
useful for us. Electrical engineers. Yeah, really, electricians. Let me explain. If you've played the Last of Us games, you'll know that you often fight the fungi with fire. Be it an improvised Molotov cocktail or a flamethrower, fire is a great tool to burn away the mushroom menace and drying out the moisture that they desperately need.
make a
But,
flamethrower.
well, I don't know
Like-
about you, but I've read the Zombie Survival Guide, and as it explains, while fire is effective at eventually killing the shambling undead, it's also very, very dangerous when you have to wait for it to do its job. The zombies could thrash around while they're burning, quickly spreading that fire, trapping you, or destroying any settlements
like,
that you've worked to put together. As the
then
advice goes, the
don't
only
do
thing
it,
worse
man.
than a
Like-
horde of zombies is a flaming horde of zombies. But that doesn't mean we can't get the same effect with something a little bit different. Electricity. Electrocution would be a very effective strategy to dry out any cordyceps zombies that get too close
Electrical
to our
fire?
settlement. Studies have shown that
It's not gonna be
targeted electrical
crazy.
shocks can kill off fungal cells in a host body, while currents with somewhere between 150 to 200 volts with an amperage of just 7 milliamps can be
know
lethal
what
to
that
humans
means.
carrying cordyceps. The long and short of it, electricity can be dangerous, and if you were able to harness
We know
that for
that.
your settlements, like say build an electric fence around your settlement to protect you from the roving hordes of zombies and bandits alike,
Like
you'd
Bill
be
had.
in a great place to survive this apocalypse. Obviously, you need to figure out a way to maintain that electricity, but there are ways to do that by burning fuel to create steam or by harnessing rivers for hydroelectric power, something that an electrical engineer would hopefully be able to figure out in this sort of life or death scenario. And just the cherry on top here, well, the best setup we've seen in the Last of Us series so far was here with our good buddy Bill, who also set up an electric fence around his town to live safely and comfortably. So in the end, I guess this part of it shouldn't be that much of a shock, huh? But hey, that's
Okay.
just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Up next on Film Theory.
That doesn't hit as hard as game theory, but whatever. You know, damn, bro. They shared a lot of stuff that I completely neglected about survival because obviously just watching the shows and games, you just worry about people, you know, or just like surviving in general, but like furthering the human population and like rebuilding society, yeah, whatever. You know, like the video, like the original video, it'll be in the description, you know. Subscribe, stay tuned for more.